Sometimes love isn't enough. As an adoptive mom, people would often say this to me, as if to imply I couldn't love my son enough to change behaviors or heal his trauma, so I should probably just give up. At least that's how I took those four powerful words, which had buried themselves deeply in my mind, leading me to doubt my ability to parent my child. Sometimes love isn't enough. That is the truth. Oftentimes you need love and powerful, personalized tools to raise a child who's experienced trauma and disrupted attachment, or a child who you're struggling to connect with. I am on a mission to help parents raising kids with a tricky past to show up with unconditional love and practical tools to lovingly manage even the most challenging of times. Be sure to subscribe to our podcast and follow us on Instagram and Facebook. Plus, if you like what you hear, I'd love for you to leave a review. Now let's get to the good stuff. Welcome back to Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. I am your host, Angie Grandt. And for today's episode, I want to talk about consequences. So I follow a lot of different groups, parenting groups, foster parenting groups, adoption groups, behavior groups, all kinds of different groups, and even just, mom groups. And one theme that I see come up time and time and time again is consequences. Our kids misbehave, and as parents, we feel pressure, or we feel like it is our duty to give our kids a consequence. And don't get me wrong, I know that there is research that shows that consequences can be a powerful way to create change in behaviors. There's a whole science behind behavior change through the use of consequences. Well, I want to start out by just outlining the definition of a consequence. I thought I'll just Google it. Consequence as just a word is the result or effect of an action or condition. So consequences can be both bad and good, right? You can buy a lottery ticket and win, and that's your consequence, right? You bought a ticket, and the consequence is that you won the lottery, right? Good consequence, I guess. I guess it depends on your perspective. Or you could, maybe your child pushes all the kids on the playground, and the consequence is that the kids don't want to play with them anymore. So in the simplest terms, a consequence is just a result of an action. But as parents, we have been taught, trained, read research or books or parenting suggestions that tell us that we need to give our kids consequences in order for them to learn how to do things differently. So back to the example, our child pushes a kid on the playground, and maybe the school, the supervisor for recess gives your child a consequence at school. Maybe they have to miss out on recess. They have a in-school suspension, or maybe they get an out-of-school suspension, or maybe they have to miss lunch and sit with the teacher, right? We tend to use consequences, negative consequences, as a way to teach a child to change a behavior, right? When we think about all of the different types of consequences we use, and when I use the word consequences, like I said, by definition, it's just the result of an action. But here for this episode, I really want to talk about, or when I'm using the word consequence, I'm really referring to those negative consequences that we hope will change the outcome of a behavior. We hope, as parents, as teachers, as support staff, that by using these negative consequences, that our child's behavior will change for the good. We hope that If, for example, they get an in-school suspension for pushing kids on the playground, that they'll stop doing that. That's the hope, right? I know as parents, like I said, we feel so much pressure that if our child backtalks, we can't just let it happen. We have to say something or do something or, take their phone or, some type of consequence for what they've done. We can't just let it slide. I know as a parent raising a child who had substantial behaviors, I know that I would hear often that if I didn't give a consequence, I was babying or pushing it under the rug or enabling. That was a big word that I heard a lot. If you don't use a consequence, you're just enabling the behavior. But I really want us to think about what led to the behavior in the first place. Because here on this podcast, we talk a lot about trauma, attachment, disrupted placement. We talk a lot about how the kids that we are raising are kids who are dysregulated, kids who have a lot going on in their past, and even kids who don't have a trauma history or an attachment history. I really want to explore the idea of talking about what led to the behavior in the first place. Because if there's any chance that the behavior came from a dysregulated child, or if there's any chance that that behavior directly stemmed from a child who's questioning their lovability or their sense of self-worth or their right place in this world, or they're feeling that they've been disempowered because they want to have a choice of what happens in their life, or a whole slew of other things that can lead to a child to misbehave. I feel so strongly that if there's any chance that that behavior that we feel like we need to give a consequence for stems from dysregulation or one of the key resiliency keys being unmet, then let's explore looking at that behavior differently. Let's consider the idea that perhaps our child wasn't misbehaving or being naughty or breaking a rule or whatever the reason is that we feel like we need a consequence. And let's explore that perhaps they have an unmet need. And it's our job as the parents, the caregivers, the teachers, the coaches, the therapists. It is our job as the adults in this situation to help our kids figure out, one, what is that unmet need? And two, how can they meet that need better, or how can we help them meet it without consequences? Because what often happens, let's take the pushing the kids on the playground example. So back to that example, let's say that your kiddo is on the playground at school. They're in third grade and the kids are out playing and your child goes around, pushes this kid off the swing, pushes that kid off the slide, pushes another kid off the monkey bars, pushes these two kids who are about to play a game of tag. But that behavior was driven by a child who's dysregulated or who feels like they're not worthy of love and feels hurt when nobody invited them to play at recess. Our intended outcome of that consequence of in-school suspension, for example, or missed recess, the intended consequence is that they learn from their mistakes, that they learn if I push, then I get some kind of punishment, or lose something that matters to me. But what about those unintended outcomes? What also happens when that behavior was driven by a broken sense of lovability or a dysregulated child? What's the unintended outcome when the adults impose a consequence of missing another recess? Well, perhaps that consequence leads to more dysregulation. This kiddo might need to get out and get physical activity in order to regulate. Or it might lead to adding another piece of evidence in this child's sense of self-worth that, see, even the teachers don't like me so much that they don't want me around. Oftentimes, when we think that our consequences are doing one thing, they're in fact really crushing really key elements of our children's sense of self-worth, their empowerment, their sense of lovability. When we think that our consequences are doing one thing, but in reality, they're doing so much more damage than good, perhaps it's time to consider a different approach. I would also add in here that often, as parents, we'll impose a second consequence, right? We find out that our child got in-school suspension or missed a recess, and then they also lose their phone at home, or they also miss out on an ice cream party, or they also can't hang out with a friend after school because they got suspended today. But didn't they already get a consequence? This is something that I see happen so often in parenting blogs, is that school already imposed a consequence. And I may or may not agree with that consequence as it is, depending on what fueled the behavior in the first place. But then parents feel this pressure to impose a second consequence. I'll hear parents say, well, I can't exactly let them play with their friends. They got suspended today. Well, okay. I know I felt the same way, but what if we look at it differently? What if we say they've already had one punishment, they don't need more? School already took care of it. I know that when I was first learning about behavior management, I was taught that we don't want to reward negative behaviors. And while I don't disagree, right? If the child is screaming in the aisle at your favorite discount store because they want a candy bar, if they're screaming and you say, oh, here, take this candy, it'll stop the screaming. I don't disagree that that type of response really can reward the behavior and make it more likely that the child's going to scream next time, regulated or not. So I'm not suggesting that we give in to what we call behaviors. I'm not suggesting that we reward those behaviors. I am, however, suggesting that we take a step back and really evaluate what fueled the behavior in the first place and what type of response, not reaction, what type of response from us as the adults will help leave our children feeling the way that we want them to feel. Do we want them to feel like they learned a lesson, but they're also disempowered? Or do we want them to leave that situation learning right from wrong, but also in an empowered way that leaves them feeling like they are worthy of love? Because we can have it both ways, right? None of it's black or white. It isn't that if I teach my child right from wrong, that they also must learn that they're not worthy of love. We can do it all. So what if we didn't impose a consequence at all? What what would the result be? What would happen if, for example, the child on the playground pushed down 3 kids or 5 kids or whatever it might be. What would happen if we didn't take away recess or suspend them or have them miss, lunch outside with the other kids or whatever it might be? What would happen if we didn't impose a consequence for what we perceive to be a negative behavior? Well, we know, like I just said, we know that oftentimes these behaviors are fueled by something other than a child just deciding that they want to misbehave. What I know about child development tells me that more often than not, children are not misbehaving just because they are trying to upset somebody or hurt somebody or to ruin our day. That's actually probably very rarely, if never, the reason for the behavior. But what's so much more likely is there's something behind the behavior. Our children are struggling with something, and the best way that they know how to tell us struggling is oftentimes with their actions. Even our kids who have very eloquent vocabularies can really struggle to say what's on their mind. It's the same for adults. My goodness, hang out with any adult in your life, and if they're hungry, sometimes we see behaviors. We see people getting grumpy and snippy with us. Or if we have somebody in our life who had a rough day at work, maybe they're more likely to snap at us or be more aggressive on their drive home, right? It happens for all of us. It's somehow we expect our kids to be great at using their words and telling us what's going on with them. And they probably don't even know. When our kids are struggling with regulation, struggling with those resiliency keys, like we've talked about, when our kids are struggling, chances are it's at such a deep body level that they don't even know. They don't have words for it. And so for us to expect our kids to tell us what's going on is such an unreasonable expectation if we ourselves as adults really struggle with that as well. So when we think about our kids and think about what is most likely fueling these actions that we call behaviors, and we take this example of the kid on the playground who pushes the other kids, what would happen if we say you're the support staff on the playground that day, or you're the parent of this child who gets the call from school? What would happen if we know this kid out and we know that they've really been struggling with questioning whether or not they're worthy of love, questioning whether or not they deserve to be loved, questioning their self-worth? If these are things that we've seen in our kids, we've seen evidence of it because of the words that they say or the way that they act, if these are, or things that we know about their past, if these are things that we know about our kids, and then we get that call or we see our kids pushing other kids on the playground, what would happen if we went over and instead of talking to our kids, we worked on helping them regulate? What would happen if we worked on helping them see through our eyes how really incredible they are? And I don't mean our kid pushes somebody on the playground and we go over and say, wow, you're such a great kid. That's not what I mean at all. But we can acknowledge that we see that they're struggling. We can go over and say, wow, something must really be hard for you today. I see that you're having a rough day. Let's go do something about it. And by do something about it, well, I definitely encourage you to listen to the regulation episode, which is coming up next week. But there are some key things that we can do in the moment for our kids to respond to their needs instead of reacting to those behaviors that we see in front of us. When we look at our kids' behaviors as a symptom of what they're struggling with instead of a choice. I often hear and see parents saying things similar to, well, they know better. They know they shouldn't hit. They know they shouldn't push. They decided to push their siblings, or whatever parents are saying, to put that blame on our kids. And absolutely, we want to teach our kids that hitting and pushing and stealing and all of those things aren't nice. We want to teach our kids how to make better choices to regulate themselves when they're dysregulated. But much in if your child has asthma, right? If your child has asthma and they're struggling to breathe, we would never say, yeah, they're choosing to not breathe good right now. They know they need to take their inhaler. They know that they need to, breathe X, Y, and Z, right? We would never say that if it was a physical something that they were dealing with. But when it comes to our kids' emotions and their sense of self-worth, for some reason, we're so quick to put the blame on our kids or accuse them of knowing better. And yeah, they know better, but in that moment, they may not be able to do better. So I encourage you, as you're interacting with your kiddo or with other kiddos, to next time you see a behavior, to really take a pause, take a deep breath, and ask yourself, what does my child need right now? What could possibly be fueling this behavior that I just saw? Is it possible that my child isn't choosing to misbehave, but instead is it possible that something's getting in the way of them doing what I know in my heart that they would much rather be playing with their friends and laughing and chasing? They'd much rather be doing that than pushing kids and being isolated. But something's getting in their way. So I encourage you to take a step back and really ask yourself, what does my child need right now? And to really reevaluate your thought about consequences. So if you're not sure how to do any of this, if you feel stuck, if you feel like, but Angie, my child needs consequences because of X, Y, or Z, reach out. I'd love to hear your perspective. I'd love for you to challenge me. And I'd love to help you if you're feeling stuck, because man, you are not alone. I've been there feeling like I didn't know how to react or respond differently to my son when things were so tricky. I wish I had a coach like me when I was in the thick of it. And I just feel so honored that I have this opportunity to help you when you're ready. So that's it. Be well, and we will talk soon. I hope that you found this episode so incredibly powerful. Thank you for joining us for Sometimes Love Isn't Enough. If you resonated with what you heard here, please subscribe to this podcast and give us a review. You can also follow us on all the socials. Check the show notes for all the details about how to start tackling behaviors and creating a powerful, loving relationship with your child, a child who needs your love the most. And if your gut's telling you that it's time for a change now, book a free consult. I'd love to help you love unconditionally and show you that you have that power within you.